I still remember the weight of that night, the heavy silence that hung between clinking glasses and polished silverware. The dining room smelled faintly of roasted rosemary chicken and red wine, but beneath it all, I caught the sour note of betrayal before a single word was spoken. I sat there, dressed in a silk blouse the color of midnight, smoothing the fabric as if it could somehow steady me. My parents were at the head of the long oak table, smiling with a kind of pride I hadn't seen in years. My sister, Claire, sat at their side, lips painted crimson, eyes darting toward me like she already knew the storm that was coming. Then my mother stood, raising a hand for attention. "We have an announcement," she said, her voice warm, proud, rehearsed. She held up a glossy, hardbound book. The gold title caught the chandelier light, Claire's Kitchen, a collection of family recipes. Applause filled the room. Relatives leaned forward, clapping, praising, calling Claire so talented, so ambitious. My father patted her back, as if she'd invented fire. And I just sat there, frozen, because every page in that book, every single recipe was mine. Recipes I had tested, written, rewritten, stained with years of flour-dusted notes. The laughter and chatter blurred into a ringing in my ears. My phone buzzed in my lap, a reminder of the life I had built far from this table, far from their recognition. A life they never imagined existed. And in that moment, I knew the truth was going to come out, whether they were ready or not. Long before that dinner, long before glossy pages and chandelier light, there was a cramped kitchen in a faded yellow house in Ohio. I was 16, elbows deep in flour, scribbling notes on scraps of paper because no one ever bought me a proper notebook. Cooking was the only place I felt seen, though, ironically, not by the people who should have mattered most. Claire would roll her eyes whenever she caught me bent over a pan, tasting, adjusting, scribbling. "You're wasting your time," she'd say, flipping her glossy hair like the world owed her admiration. My parents would chuckle, never correcting her. To them, I was just playing, while Claire was the golden one, the dancer, the pageant girl, the star. I still remember one night, trying to get them to taste a new dish I'd worked on for weeks, rosemary lemon chicken with a honey glaze. I placed it on the table with trembling hands, heart hammering in my chest. My father barely glanced up from the newspaper. "Not bad," he muttered, before passing the plate to Claire. She stabbed a bite with her fork, chewed dramatically, then smirked. "It's edible." Laughter followed, sharp and hollow. I forced a smile, but inside, something cracked. My throat tightened, eyes burned, but I swallowed it all down. That was the night I realized I would never win their approval, not in that house. A week later, my grandmother, my father's mother, the only one who ever really saw me, handed me a worn leather-bound notebook. The pages were blank, except for her first note scrawled inside the cover. "Fill this with flavors they'll never forget. One day, they'll taste your worth." Her hands were warm, trembling with age, but her eyes held fire. I clutched that notebook like it was salvation. The next morning, after another dinner where Claire soaked up praise and I sat invisible, I packed a small bag. The notebook went in first. My hands shook as I zipped it shut, but the decision was clear. If I stayed, I'd disappear into their shadows. If I left, maybe, just maybe, I could find a place where my food, my voice, my heart mattered. So I walked out of that yellow house with nothing but $20, a bus ticket, and my grandmother's notebook. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. The first few months after leaving home were brutal. I landed in Chicago with a bus ticket stub, 2 changes of clothes, and that leather-bound notebook tucked under my arm like armor. I slept on a friend's couch for a while, then in a studio apartment that smelled of mildew and regret. Rent ate up most of my paycheck from the diner where I waitressed, but the kitchen was my classroom. The head cook, Maria, a sharp-eyed woman with hands scarred from decades of burns, was the first to notice me. She'd bark orders at the line, but every so often, she'd pause when I slipped in suggestions. "Too much salt," I'd whisper. Or, "Try a squeeze of lime instead of lemon." At first, she scowled. Then one day, She shoved a skillet at me and said, "Fine. Show me." My hands trembled as I seared chicken thighs, deglazed the pan, and added a sauce I'd been perfecting since high school. The kitchen went silent when Maria tasted it. She didn't smile. Maria never smiled, but she handed me a real chef's knife the next day. That was her way of saying, "You belong here." Nights blurred into mornings. I burned myself more times than I could count, blistered fingers wrapped in gauze as I chopped onions until tears streamed down my face, half from the sting, half from exhaustion. There were nights I wanted to quit, when self-doubt whispered louder than my own ambition. But then I'd open my grandmother's notebook, see her words, and remind myself, I wasn't just cooking, I was carving a place for myself in a world that had never left me room at the table. My first small victory came when a food critic visited the diner unannounced. He ordered the chicken special, my chicken special. A week later, a small review appeared in the local paper, calling it surprisingly refined for a corner diner. Maria clipped it out and pinned it to the wall. "Your name's not in it," she said, "but your food is. That's enough." It wasn't enough for me, but it was fuel. Over the next few years, I hustled. Catered events, pop-up kitchens, anything to get my food in front of people. I saved every dollar, turned down every holiday invitation from my family. They assumed I was still finding myself, and I let them. Better they underestimate me than sniff too close to the fire I was building. By the time I was 26, I had my own catering company, small, scrappy, but profitable. At 28, I opened my first restaurant in Chicago, tucked on a quiet corner, but glowing with soft light and honest flavors. I named it Eleanor's Table, after my grandmother. The opening night was a blur of faces, laughter, and clinking glasses. As I stood in the kitchen doorway, apron dusted with flour, watching people savor dishes born from that leather notebook, I felt something I'd never known at home: validation. But I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Claire. To them, I was still the girl with silly cooking experiments. And maybe that was my greatest secret weapon. While they looked past me, I was building an empire right under their noses. The night of the dinner, I knew something was off before I even arrived. My mother's invitation had been oddly formal, a typed card in the mail with gold trim. Family celebration dinner. Formal attire. No explanation. Just a date and time. I almost didn't go. But a part of me, the same stubborn streak that had walked out of that yellow house years ago, wanted to see what kind of show they were putting on this time. The restaurant they'd chosen was a grand place, all chandeliers and white tablecloths. I walked in, heels clicking against the marble floor, my silk blouse smooth against my skin. Heads turned, as they often do now, but my family barely noticed me as I approached. They were too busy fawning over Claire. She was glowing in a red dress, lips painted to match, smiling like the queen she believed herself to be. My parents sat beaming on either side of her, faces lit with pride. The meal began with small talk, though I noticed Claire never looked me directly in the eye. I should have trusted that instinct. Then, just as dessert plates were cleared, my mother rose with dramatic flair. She reached into a gift bag and pulled out a glossy, hardcover book. The title gleamed beneath the chandelier light: Claire's Kitchen, a collection of family recipes. The applause started instantly. Aunts, uncles, cousins leaned forward, praising the ambition, the beauty of it. My father's chest puffed with pride, as though he himself had written it. But as the book made its way around the table, page after page revealed dishes that lived in my bones. Lemon rosemary chicken, honey lavender scones, the exact cranberry glaze I'd spent weeks perfecting. Every photograph, every measurement mine. Word for word from the notes in my grandmother's leather notebook. My pulse thundered in my ears. I forced my face into a neutral mask, but inside, a storm was raging. Claire's gaze flicked to mine. Quick, nervous, almost guilty, but she looked away before I could catch her. Finally, the book landed in my lap. I opened it slowly, fingers brushing the glossy paper, my own handwriting echoed in print. For a long moment, I didn't speak. I simply closed it, set it on the table, and let the silence stretch. Then I leaned back, my voice calm, almost casual. Interesting collection, Claire. Tell me, when exactly did you start experimenting with lemon zest to balance acidity? She froze, lips parting. A bead of sweat broke along her hairline. The room quieted, laughter dying mid-breath. My mother frowned. Darling, what are you implying? I looked at her, at all of them, then smiled, slow and sharp. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating it. Every recipe in that book is mine. Gasps fluttered across the table. My father shook his head, dismissive. Nonsense. Claire has always been creative. Really? I cut in, voice steady, strong. Then perhaps you'd like to know where I was last weekend. Accepting an award from the Chicago Culinary Guild. Or maybe you'd prefer a reservation at Eleanor's Table. You know, the restaurant I own? The one recently named one of the top 50 in the country. Silence. Pure, stunned silence. I let it hang there, savoring it the way one savors the first bite of a perfectly cooked dish. Their eyes darted from me to Claire, confusion giving way to disbelief, then shame. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her glass. My father looked like he'd swallowed glass himself. Claire's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. For the first time in my life, they saw me. Not as the invisible girl in the kitchen, not as the afterthought, but as the woman I had become. And I wasn't about to let them look away. The silence around the table stretched so long you could hear the hum of the chandelier above us. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice thin and shaky. I just thought it would be flattering. You know, a tribute. You never share those recipes, so I thought. You thought wrong. My words cut sharper than I intended, but I didn't pull them back. Taking someone's work without credit isn't a tribute. It's theft. Her eyes welled up, but I didn't soften. Not yet. My parents exchanged looks, defensive, guilty, but too proud to admit it. My father cleared his throat. Well, maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Surely you don't want to make a scene. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. This is the scene. And since you've all finally noticed me, let me be clear about a few things. I paused, scanning their faces, Claire, flushed and trembling. My mother, stiff-backed and pale. My father, suddenly very small despite his broad shoulders. My voice stayed calm, even, but every word carried weight. First, Claire, if you want to be taken seriously, you'll need to issue a public statement. You'll admit the cookbook is based on my recipes, my intellectual property. You'll apologize, not just to me, but to the people who bought it under false pretenses. You can still have your spotlight, but it won't come from my work. Claire swallowed hard, nodding faintly, though her eyes darted away. Second, Mom and Dad. You don't get to erase me anymore. I'm not your invisible child, your experimental cook. I've built something real, something respected, without your approval or your help. If you want to be in my life, it will be on honest terms. No minimizing. No pretending. Claire's shine came from her own light when it was borrowed from mine. My mother flinched, blinking fast. My father pressed his lips together, but said nothing. And third, I took a breath, my chest tightening, though my voice never wavered. If any of you want access to my world, my restaurants, my home, then you'll start showing me the respect you withheld for years. That means acknowledging my accomplishments without twisting them. That means treating me as an equal, not as a shadow. The weight of my words settled like iron over the table. I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry, didn't beg. I simply stated terms, as a woman who finally knew her worth. For once, no one interrupted. No dismissive laughter, no quick retorts. Just silence, heavy and raw. Finally, Claire whispered, I'll make it right. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. My father shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't let myself search for his approval anymore. That chapter was closed. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The power had shifted, and not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. Every blistered hand, every sleepless night, every recipe inked into that leather notebook. For the first time in my life, the table was mine. In the weeks that followed, The ripples from that dinner spread farther than I expected. Claire did issue a statement, halting, awkward, but honest enough to satisfy the press. She admitted the recipes weren't hers, that they came from a sister whose brilliance deserved recognition long ago. It wasn't perfect, but it was public, and that was enough. My parents tried, in their own clumsy way, to bridge the gap. My mother sent flowers to Eleanor's table with a note that read, "We should have tasted you sooner." My father booked a table one quiet afternoon and sat stiffly as he ate the rosemary chicken I'd once begged him to notice. He didn't say much, but the tears he tried to hide in his napkin spoke louder than words. I didn't forgive them overnight. Wounds that deep don't vanish with a single gesture. But slowly, I let them see pieces of my world. The kitchen humming with life, the framed award from the Culinary Guild, the photo of Grandma Eleanor hanging by the hostess stand. And in the quiet moments, I'd open that old leather notebook, pages now worn soft with use. The ink had smudged over the years, flour and butter stains blotting the corners. On the inside cover, her words still glowed like a lighthouse. "Fill this with flavors they'll never forget. One day, they'll taste your worth." She had been right. I built a life from those flavors, a name from those stains. My family's doubt had once been a chain around my neck, but I had melted it down, reforged it into something unbreakable. And though revenge tasted sweet that night at dinner, what lingered afterward was not bitterness, but freedom. Now, when I stand in my restaurant's kitchen, apron dusted with flour, I no longer wonder if I belong. I no longer wait for applause from the wrong table. The people who taste my food, the team who stands beside me, the woman I've become, that's where validation lives. And if my family ever doubts again, I'll simply remind them of what I told myself the day I left that yellow house. I don't need a seat at their table. I built my own.